You are listening to Sober Motivation Radio. If you haven't already, crush that like button and crush that subscribe button. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sober Motivation Podcast, Episode 7, Shooting for the Moon in Sobriety. So, this podcast is about when you finally find your way out of the shackles of substance addiction, where your life was once controlled by substance, and have what I call freedom eventually. And from that point, I think that it's important to think about this idea of shooting for the moon. And the book that I'm reviewing with you all from my affiliate partner is Blinkist. This book is called Shoot for the Moon by Richard Wiseman, who gives me the inspiration, and hopefully you all as well, for shooting for the moon in sobriety. So the first topic that we go into for shooting for the moon in sobriety is that it says, you get to learn about the wisdom and life lessons that made the Apollo missions possible. So there was obviously a time where, before anyone had set any foot onto the moon, that it was considered just a fantasy. And to think that eventually that this would go from just being a dream to a living, breathing thing that happened and has been written about in history, and crazy. It's so crazy that people question whether or not it even happened. I happen to believe that it honestly did, because in the 60s, what were people doing anyways? I get the music scene was pretty big, and the drug scene, I guess, was probably pretty big as well. But I also have to imagine that some people weren't just doing that, and they were thinking about things that were deeply related to science and actually going and doing it. I mean, if you look at just between all these wars that we've had with World War II and the development of the atom bomb and all these other great scientific innovations too. I mean, it's not just that, but other things that people have sat there and developed in that time frame, like the microwave. I believe it was developed in the 50s. But just pretty wild that, somebody was sitting there trying to figure out, hey, how do we get onto the moon? And so that's what I think that my sobriety entails, and I hope that some of you guys have maybe a similar perspective of what you want to do with your sobriety. So the first point that the book makes is that it says that you have to figure out what your sense of purpose is, and that it is a great motivator, and the presence of known competitors is also a great motivator. So I can agree to that point, for the first point being that having a sense of purpose is a great motivator. So for me personally, where I've been developing this brand and trying to figure out what's helping people and what's not, and kind of trying to figure out how to let my own personal light shine so that perhaps other people can see that light as well and gravitate towards it. Because I have to tell you, right now, with being in sobriety, it's such serenity that I haven't felt since ever. Because one of the things that helped me, obviously, was that I had to go to a treatment program. So if you guys are in the process of getting off of a substance, obviously I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to say, hey, do this and this will fix your issue. I think obviously if you guys have any issues where if you leave whatever chemical that you're using to where it causes withdrawals and potentially life-threatening issues, that you obviously need to work with your medical providers to make sure that the worst doesn't happen to you, because I don't want that for anybody. But the ability to have clarity in my life I haven't had in a long time, and especially when I was drinking, just in this moment right now, I can feel the fact that I'm not chained to addiction. I'm not compressed. My anxiety is not flying off the walls. And if I'm thinking about things, it's kind of crazy. When I wake up, first thing I'm looking at is, oh man, this sober motivation is blowing up. People are following it. People are checking out the YouTube. I checked out the Simplecast platform that I feed the podcast out through, and saw that some people were, even in Iceland, listening to this podcast. So honestly, if you guys are in Iceland listening to this, I would totally be thrilled to have you guys on the show and just do a quick interview and see what you guys are all about. But anyways, the other thing that it talks about is the presence of known competitors is another motivating factor. And I think that's also an important point to point out as well, because for myself, when I've started to develop this brand, it actually before started out as Speak Motivation. And I had to realize what am I capable of doing to compete with that idea. And something that I've spent time learning about is this thing called SEO, which is search engine optimization, which basically is how things get found on the internet. And even Instagram has a form of what's called search engine optimization, where whether or not you're typing in just whatever in the description or however you're using the hashtags in the description, it relates to search engine optimization. And it's the same thing when you go into YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Using tags is basically trying to boost up whatever you're using for search engine optimization. So with that in mind, when I was trying to develop a podcast with, again, shout out to Ryan Helms and Daxie Perez, I ran the idea to Ryan Helms about whether I should just go with a motivation podcast, because I had this epiphany where I need to develop something that revolves around promoting self-love, because I find or feel for myself that that's something that is not well promoted in society. And he suggested to me thinking about sobriety as a topic, and it was hard for me to think about, because for me it's so dark for me, but it's been liberating to be able to talk about it on a platform like this. And I know that, for instance, there's programs out there that are against promotion and they're about attraction over promotion, and that is what it is. That's their program. I can't tell them how to run anything, but they can't tell me how to run what I'm doing either. If it's working for me, it's working for me. So that's where I like the idea of understanding what competition is. So when I went about building sober motivation, it was a task, because I had a bunch of different names that I was running around with. First, obviously, I put together with Speak Motivation, and then I saw Sober Motivation. And I just like the idea of sober motivation, because for me, sobriety is not just abstaining from chemical. It's the development of truth in your life altogether. So that's why I went with Sober Motivation. And as I said, I'm not in the sobriety game 20 years. I'm not going to claim that. I'm not going to claim, hey, I have all these other crazy certifications. I don't want to claim that to any of you guys. But what I can claim is my authenticity that I've been bringing to the platform, and letting you guys know exactly who I am, what I'm about, how I've been developing this brand, things that I'm using to develop this brand, and keeping it pretty open book for you guys to use for yourselves, hopefully. So with that all in mind, with competition in mind also, when I was looking over everything, because for instance, if say you decide to follow some of the information that I dropped in the previous podcast with crushing it, something that I've learned with developing this is that you cannot be afraid of competing, and that is a big deal for me. So for instance, I looked at on Instagram, there's somebody with a similar Instagram name to me that I wish I could have gotten. I didn't get it. It's not a big deal because of the fact to me that I'm willing to compete and put out higher quality content that I can be proud of on a consistent factor, and that what I'm putting out is actually that it's sober motivation. It's the real deal. It's at least what I think is working or going to help people. And so that's where I think that competition obviously can help you. And I think that, for instance, if you guys are trying to build your own brand and you have an idea of what you're trying to work on, and if you see somebody else doing maybe something similar to what you're doing, I mean, honestly, where you get angry about things on a daily basis, because I know for myself I can get angry for very little reasons where I have to go figure out why I'm angry in the first place. But you can start using that energy that you build up with anger towards something positive, like competing with what you're doing to build a better you, essentially. So on top of that, however, understand how being competitive, it needs to be balanced against other important factors, like knowing when to take it easy. So obviously, like I said, I get somewhat angry, and like I said, I had somewhat of an issue with something that was going on. It had to do with the idea of how I'm running this whole platform, because I'm not going anonymously. I'm, like I said, kind of wide open on this one, and I had to think about for future content and future podcasts, how would I let others come to me if they wanted to share their story. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, I have to take the best high road that I can. So I think getting even is not a good idea, because people who start wars are not always great people. And I considered it, and then I ran the idea with other people, and this was actually really recent. This was today. And I ran the idea through somebody who I'm actually friends with on Facebook. He runs a website called simplyjedi.com. Opie MacLeod. I'm trying to get him onto this podcast eventually. Hopefully pretty soon we can hear from him, because I love his YouTube videos. He just has so much wisdom to drop, and I like it. But I had to ask him a question about how to keep a level head with making decisions. And then this is when I made the Instagram post. I was like, don't make decisions when you're angry. Get the anger out of your system first, and then think about what you're doing. Have the most level head that you can have before you make any decisions. And honestly, if you're angry and you still can't make the decision, maybe just don't make the decision. I honestly kind of just walked away from it, and I'm going to probably guess that when I come back to it, chances are my brain will have more clarity as the time goes. So that's where it goes into the next point. It says taking breaks and getting a good night's sleep are important to foster innovative powers. And I think that this is a fantastic point to make, especially, like I said, for myself, where I was running into an angry emotion when I was trying to figure out a decision. And I went to sleep, obviously, and I still didn't make the decision. I woke up, and I at least feel better about that idea of making a decision, or if I even need to make a decision about it at all. So that was important for me. And then the book also, it goes in to talk about how people who work for these leading companies such as Google and Nike are encouraging their employees to take naps. and that they believe that that fosters creativity or innovation with their workplace. And I actually agree with that. I think that if you want good creativity and innovation and ideas to just flow for you well, think about sleeping, because when you're not sleeping, obviously you're worked up. You're going to be angry and probably not even realize it. Like I realized when I was upset or annoyed that I didn't even know that I was angry until after I woke up, and I just felt the relief of the emotion. So I believe that's important if you guys are trying to figure out how to deal with it and you guys are in sobriety and you're angry about something and you're trying to stay on the right path. Take a step back, take a nap if you have to, and get up when you're in a better mood and try to deal with it from there. And so it goes into the next point. It says, for success, it is important to cultivate a positive outlook and to find heroes to worship. And it says, no matter what you want to do in life, it is important to maintain a positive outlook. And it also talks about developing a ability to mentally replay something that you believe you did extremely well with in the past, and kind of have that as a tool for yourself for when you're working on something else that's difficult. You have to kind of replay some things in your mind that let you think, oh, well, I did this, so that should give you the at least mental momentum to push forward to what you're doing. And I came across a powerful speech, a motivational speech online, and somebody who I don't want to mention his name, but he's financially well off. But one thing that he mentioned was momentum, and I think that idea fits in really well with this point. And I feel like I can give testimony to that fact that, for instance, building the Facebook, building the YouTube, building the Instagram has all been momentum. And as I'm doing it, while I know the next day where I see progress growing continuously on a day-to-day basis, I also have to realize, even when it's not growing at a pace that it might not have been at a previous state, I can still look at all of this and say, hey, look, this pretty much didn't exist until I sat down and put my hard work to use. Because like I said, and it's crazy to me when I think about it, the whole sober motivation, about 2 months ago, it was a $12 domain for sale on Google, and I purchased it, and I've developed it to where it's gaining traffic, it's gaining a platform, it's gaining progress on YouTube. Something that I saw where like I said, I watch what's called the search engine optimization, and I like to see how things rank. I observed how my last podcast I just put out, Sober Motivation, Crushing It in Sobriety, I had it past, I believe, Joe Rogan's podcast, and there was a few other podcasts that I watched this podcast go past, and I was so happy. And just seeing my video, something that basically didn't exist until I made it past people who have these huge names, for me was like, man, I'm like, this is crazy. I'm coming pretty much out of nowhere to go deal with this. But it's another thing where they also offer you to think about is that if you, I guess, are having a problem with trying to go back on some memories, that another thing that you can actually do is look at people that are strong role models that can serve to you as a reminder that extraordinary things can actually be achieved. And I can totally agree with that. something that I've actually gotten quite a bit of motivation from my personal life. So when I was young, when I was in, I believe, middle school or actually high school, at some point I believed that I was going to be a professional wrestler, and I'm about 5'8", $170 on a good day of eating, and I always looked up to some of these guys, and I get they're never who they are in real life, and that is what it is, but I believe it did help me quite a bit. One of the things that I've gotten out of some personal heroes of mine were, for instance, some of the books that they've produced. So there was a workout book from Triple H, actually, and I'll leave that. I'm going to leave that in the description box because it's actually a great workout book that it basically taught me how to build muscle and just get it done. And one of the key points that I took away from that book was basically don't try to go crazy with being exact on your diet where you have to eat perfectly clean chicken and all this other stuff just to build muscle. It's like if you're not going in to be a professional bodybuilder, go on stage in a bikini or a Speedo, don't stress out about it that much because chances are just adjusting it slightly will make a difference. So that helped me out a lot. And then some of the people that I look up to now, for instance, I would say one of them that I definitely look up to at this point in my life is Grant Cardone. He has been a great inspiration for me, and he's been pretty motivating for me to get in here, get on the podcast, and just get myself known, get myself working on what I'm working on. Because, and like I said, if you guys haven't checked out this person, and I'll leave a book from him too in the description. He is fantastic, and if you follow him on Instagram, he's basically a real estate investor, and he's worth millions. I don't want to say he's worth $1 billion, but he's worth millions. But on top of that, the guy he works out too quite a bit, but he gives a good perspective on it in that don't go to the gym all day and spend all day there. He says just do 30 minutes and leave. And I like what he says, and I think it makes a lot of sense because he looks like he's doing pretty well in life, obviously. I mean, and you never know, obviously. Social media, you can be whoever you want on social media. But he makes a good point to not spend a ridiculous amount of time at the gym. Basically, handle your business at the gym and go work on the other things that you need to work on, which I think is quite a bit of wisdom in the idea of just keeping balance going in your life. So for the next point in this book, it says, for success, it is important to have a growth mindset, especially when dealing with failures. And then it goes on to talk about the study that was done in 2007 where a person, a psychologist, Carol Dweck, who termed the term growth mindset as well as a fixed mindset, which if you have a fixed mindset, that's basically saying that somebody believes their abilities are set in stone. But this person, I guess in 2007, she rolled out an experiment onto high school kids, and she was able to identify the difference between what a growth mindset high school student is, or a growth mindset person is, and what a fixed mindset person is. And the difference and why it's so important to have a growth mindset is basically she illustrated it through the ability that the students who were able to have a growth mindset while working on math problems, which was the experiment that she was rolling out, showed that they weren't afraid of failure, and that they knew that even though that they failed at trying to figure out the math problem, that they could go back over it again and actually figure it it out where students who had a fixed-minded mindset were so worried about getting an incorrect solution to the problem that they were mediocre, and they thought that they would never get better. And because of the fact that they were fixed-minded, they were reluctant to trying to get better. So I think that's important. And I also think it's important with sobriety, being that for the growth-minded approach to sobriety, I think that, God forbid if you relapse, and for myself as well, but I think the ability to understand that you can fall off a horse and you can get back onto the horse and ride it. And it's the same thing with riding a bike. If you haven't ridden a bike before, just as if you haven't tried to get clean before, if you've never done it before, to let anyone but yourself judge how or what you're doing actually is not going to help you. And that's where having the growth mindset is also still important, because you have to stay positive on the idea that you're going to get up and ride the bike like you need to or want to. And I guess another point that I'd like to add to that too, because it was something interesting that I was observing as I've been trying to hash out my YouTube channel, was that do not be upset or afraid of the idea that you've got a small amount of sobriety. And as they pointed out, everybody starts at zero. So if you've been struggling and you're finally clean and sober for day one matters just as much as 20 years matters, because in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you've done 1 day or 20 days. The next day, you could be drinking anyways. But if you can still do that 1 day and then do that 1 day at a time each and every time, then obviously it grows over time. So, to the next point, it says to avoid procrastination, take things one step at a time and set yourself smart deadlines. And this is a pretty important point that I believe is made. It basically talks about how when you're dealing with the fact that you want to achieve a goal. So me, for instance, if I'm trying to build this sober motivation brand, I have to, for one, realize at this point I'm only one person. And so that is what it is. But on top of that fact that I have to figure out how to set smarter deadlines for myself. And so something that has worked pretty well with me is the podcast. So it doesn't really take me too much time to kind of figure out what books I want to go over, what books I'm emotionally feeling like that will work for certain episodes, and then to get it basically uploaded and produced. And then on top of that, with YouTube vlogs, I figured out I was originally going to shoot for a vlog a day, and then I figured out how much of a task it was to basically record the video and then edit it and then get it published to YouTube. So if I were to do a YouTube video, typically it could take me anywhere between 1 to 3 hours just to film a simple vlog, and then to get it up onto the YouTube, I still have to edit it before it gets into there. So I've figured out to set smarter deadlines for the vlogs, to where, as much as I love the fact that they perform as well as they do for some reason, to think that I'm going to do that every day and not just burn out is not a smart approach. So I've figured out to kind of reserve the vlogs for the weekends and then just work on the podcast during the week, since it's easier to keep consistency on that and then still get at least something published to YouTube or onto the podcast so that you guys can follow it. And I believe that helps a lot, especially if you're starting out small. Just don't see the long term of things, because you're only going to overwhelm yourself. I think that and this also relates to sobriety, where you shouldn't think about, oh, I have to stay clean for 20 years. Think about, I just have to stay clean today for this moment. And I believe that's an extremely useful way of looking at anything that you're working on. If you're working on sobriety, staying clean, if you're working on going to school, just work on it little by little, because it's those little by little bits of effort that add up over time. And I was watching the inspirational video that Al Pacino made with the Any Given Sunday movie. I was watching a clip of it on YouTube, and how he was talking about it's inch by inch that enables you to eventually win. And while, yes, you still need your team, it's all of it that works together, and it's not just one over-encompassing fact. It's not just, oh, hey, this team came out and beat that team, and, like, that's it. Like, there's all the little details that go on inside the team functioning together, working together so that they can overcome what they're all facing together. So I believe that's an extremely important idea to think about. And so the next point it goes into, it says, to achieve your goals, you have to make tough decisions. So you should learn to embrace your fears. And I think that's extremely important. It's been actually something that's been important for me. So for myself, something that I didn't think that I was going to be doing as consistently as I've been doing is a podcast. I embraced doing just the first one. I figured out that it's better to be really crappy at first and get it done versus being absolutely perfect at something or being absolutely perfect at getting nothing done. So I chose, obviously, I'd rather be crappy at first and get something done versus not getting anything done in 100% fashion. It's, I think, something that you have to realize. And, whatever you're working on, you're never going to start out perfectly. Nobody starts anything out perfectly. And I think that's been something that's always helped me going forward, to help me approach situations that where if I'm feeling nervous or frightened about something, I tell myself, hey, nobody's starting out anything perfectly. Nobody has ridden a bike on their first time. If they have, I need to see that. If somebody's never ridden a bike before, if there's some 2-year-old that's never ridden a bike before, is just gone from walking to hopping on a bike and riding around, I'd have to see that, because it's obviously not true. And even if it was, it's such a small percentage. It's such a drop in the bucket that it's irrelevant to the whole picture of things. So, and then it goes on to saying, this is a good opportunity to consider what you feel frightened of. Perhaps it's public speaking, swimming, or talking to strangers at a party. So maybe it's time to take a swimming class or volunteer to give a big presentation at work. And honestly, I believe that is absolutely true, to figure out what you're struggling with and just go at it. And so for me personally, something that I've struggled with is public speaking. I figured out that, and I know that I'm poor at it, but I had to find opportunities that would let me into it, to jump in the deep end of the pool and figure out how to swim. So one thing that has helped me with public speaking was, obviously, first is podcasts, because I get to go back, listen to what I'm saying and what sounds weird or what could be better. But then the other thing that I've taken up that has actually helped me was a college radio class. So if any of you guys are interested in building a public speaking skill and you guys are trying to start doing something, check out your community colleges. There's a good chance that they have openings for you guys to go work at your college radio stations. And the great thing about that is, at least for myself, where I found out with the college radio class that I'm taking is that I get to play music and ease up kind of my emotion, and then on top of that, I get to mess up in front of everybody with public speaking. So if I can't get comfortable messing up completely live in front of everyone, then it is what it is. So as I've said, figure out where you can basically jump into the deep end and figure out how to swim, because I believe that's really what gives you the overall confidence in your life, and it makes you braver and more confident at making decisions in even the hardest of times. So the last point, it says, being well prepared for major events is crucial, and identifying potential problems in advance helps. When you take pre-mortem, you can systematically go through all the potential pitfalls and make sure that you've done everything you can to prevent them from arising, or quickly and calmly deal with them if they arise. And again, a great final point, I believe, for actually we get one more point after that, but I also think that's a good point in kind of thinking proactively about issues that might come up. So something that I've definitely proactively thought about as I've been creating these vlogs and podcasts, and that's kind of hard to deal with with YouTube, is that I have to make sure whatever I'm producing is not going to get hit with copyright claims. So to do that, at first, and as I am currently, I'm not really using music because I just don't want to deal with the copyright claims, but I do understand that I have somebody who I'm working with currently to eventually use his music for what I'm trying to do, but that's just one way of seeing things. And then the other way of kind of thinking of things proactively is putting on different hats that let you imagine what could go wrong. And so for me personally, as somebody who works as a surgical tech, it's kind of just second nature, where you just have to sit there and imagine, okay, what's the worst possible thing that could happen right now in this very moment, and how am I going to respond to it? And the more you just think about it systematically and develop systems to handle things in your brain when the situations arise, even if you don't completely know what to do and you are in a position where you just are going to have to wing it as you're going, at least having the mindset that you're being proactive in regards to potential issues and crisis gives you at least that little bit better chance of success in coming through in the way you hope to. So going on into the final point, it says, being adaptable is important for achieving goals, and it also promotes happiness. And it says, in the end, there was a study that found that the more adaptable employees were not only more productive, they also reported being happier than their less adaptable peers. And I believe that's actually been quite true with myself, from what I can see, and just day-to-day life. I believe you have to be adaptable to just life in general, and that means getting sober, figuring out how to not keep drinking and destroying your life, and doing it by whatever means necessary. So, for instance, for myself, I knew that staying sober was going to probably require something like this. I've just figured it out, that as I'm doing it, the more clarity, the more steady, the more calm and confident I am in my sobriety. And I guess the traditional approach for sobriety for some people has been Alcoholics Anonymous, where they go into a 12-step program and then they work each and every step. But I had to be still adaptable for myself. And so, for instance, instead of going with just the traditional Alcoholics Anonymous, I went with the 12-step Jedi Program, which in the third step of AA, it suggests you have to figure out a higher power, whereas in the 12-step with the Jedi program, it suggests using the Force as your higher power. And I just find the idea of using the Force, it's kind of funny, but I can still relate to it because I can tell the balance of something when it feels negative or if it feels positive. And with that, I wanted to bring up a Yoda quote that I came across when I was in my earlier months of sobriety. It says, "You will know the good from the bad when you are calm, at peace, a passive. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense and never for attack." And I just loved the idea of that because for myself, like I said, personally, I can feel when there's negativity in there, and it doesn't have to, it's such a weird way of describing it, but you can feel it when you can feel when there's something negative or pressing against you that just doesn't seem right, versus when you're calm and you're at peace and everything's good. You understand that. And on top of what he says you're using the Force for knowledge and defense. So you're using it to learn more, which is what I love to do, and obviously to protect yourself and never to hurt people. And I just loved it. And I guess just going that route, just reading it and following it has helped me a lot in staying adaptable and staying sober, because at the end of the day, it's what keeps me sober and not picking up a drink and going backwards into the depths of basically hell of being drunk. And I refuse it. And if that means that I'm following the Jedi path because I find it more relatable for myself, then that's what I'm going to do. And again, if you guys feel that if that's not it for you, if it's the Alcoholics Anonymous way to go or follow, then follow that. I just want whatever works for everybody. So that helps them, obviously, in the long run in staying sober. So, and then it goes into the final summary. It says, "Nothing is out of reach, and you too can achieve the seemingly impossible by learning from the Apollo teams that made the lunar missions a reality. Achieve great things is neither a miracle nor just a matter of luck. To attain your goals, figure out how to find a deeper purpose to your work. Take breaks, sleep on problems, work on your courage, and prepare for everything, even the unexpected." And the actionable advice it leaves is to create your own competition to boost your motivation, which could be basically maybe finding somebody to have a friendly competition with. So, for instance, I could compete, I guess, with YouTube subscribers. It's not a real aggressive fight, but I know there's some people who are in my circle who are building YouTube channels, and something that I was kind of considering doing was challenging them to a YouTube subscriber, or maybe not even that, like a content or a vlog challenge where you put out a vlog every single day of the month, and that in turn helps you both basically work on your goals anyways, where nobody is really losing in any situation. So there we have it for episode 7, shooting for the moon in sobriety. I hope you guys are all shooting for the moon, or shooting for your goals, or accomplishing your goals as it's working. I hope you guys enjoyed what I've been putting out. I've been enjoying giving it to you guys and seeing the viewerships and subscriptions grow. I've also been developing some other things as this podcast has been growing. I've been looking at developing a giveaway, And I also have some little secrets that are in store that I have brewing that I'm looking to share with you guys all pretty soon. So stay tuned for it, and I hope you guys are all enjoying this, and I hope you guys all subscribe, and I will see you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sober Motivation Radio. If you're not subscribed already, please be sure to do that right now. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could do me a quick favor and rate and review the podcast. This lets the platform know that I'm doing something right and people like the content. It would be a huge help, and I would be grateful. Be sure to head over to sobermotivation.com and pick up the Sober Motivation ebook. This book will teach you about sobriety, motivation, maintaining sobriety and motivation. Also, what would be some of the key things that you can do afterwards when becoming sober so that you can maintain the positive attitude to stay motivated and sober. Until next time, stay sober and stay motivated.